Lifting belts, are they a crutch or are they crucial? Are they a good lifting tool or do they make you look like a tool? In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to talk about both sides of the coin when it comes to lifting belts so you can make an informed lifting decision. Tune in and take notes.
Welcome to the CrossFit Edwardsville Community Podcast, where we hear and learn from our coaches, CrossFitters, and Glen Ed community leaders. Now, here are your hosts, Dallas and Greg.
Guys, lifting belts are super common in lifting world, super common in CrossFit world. And some people feel so strongly like you should absolutely not do that. And some folks feel like absolutely it's so valuable to use lifting belts. So what is true, what is accurate? In this episode of the podcast, I'll kind of give my take on this and I'll explore both sides of the equation. By the way, as I get into this, major shout out to Josh Nimmo, Coach Josh over at CrossFit Metro East. Super good dude who I've followed him since forever, probably like 15, maybe more years now. He did a social post where he talked about this topic, and that's what inspired this podcast in the first place. So I have invited Josh to come on the podcast and kind of wax poetic with me about this. Hopefully that'll happen in the near future too, because Josh has a super informed, super thoughtful opinion on the matter. And I thought it could be a really cool conversation. But for now, I'll just kind of do a monologue. So let me start by first explaining, we're talking about when we're lifting heavy things in the gym. Some people like to wear a supportive brace or a thick supportive belt around their midsection, around their abdomen. And there's a handful of reasons why somebody might do this. The first is this is not like how they think of it, but what's actually happening is when you wear a supportive belt around your midline, it allows you to create an increase in abdominal pressure, which can create a more stable central platform upon which to convey the power of your arms or your legs into the barbell that you're lifting. That's a whole lot of words just to say, in short, it does actually make you stronger on the lift as measured by how much weight that you can lift. In fact, most of us in lifting world fully acknowledge that we can lift sometimes 5, 10, 15% more weight if we have a lifting belt on versus not having a lifting belt on. And so you could argue, all right, cool, it's enhancing my ability to lift heavy things. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? That kind of is up to the lifter. But here's what I'll argue. If we're talking about the pros of wearing a lifting belt, you could argue that because here's what's happening. So when you wear the belt, you can take a big breath of air in and then lock that pocket of air against the belt. And the belt is very firm, very solid. And therefore, with air in your diaphragm, air in your torso, bracing against this firm surface that is the belt, it makes your whole core a more solid piece, effectively. And as I mentioned before, therefore, it allows you to more effectively transfer the effort of your legs or the effort of your arms through and into the bar because there's a more stable surface upon which you're generating the force from or through. And when you do that, it actually lets you lift more weight, which could then, you could argue as a pro, it lets you test and push your muscles at a higher level than you could do in the absence of the belt. If we look at a squat, for example, this is where if you can actually lift 10% more when you're back squatting, if you lift a belt, therefore your entire system, your skeletal system gets more loading, the bones, the tissues, the ligaments receive a more powerful stimulus to develop strong tissue quality. The muscles of your legs, your glutes, your hamstrings, your quads, your calves, the stabilizer muscles get more of a workout that way. Or if you look at, something like a push press belted, now your upper body is also getting more of a workout. And so you could say that this tool enhances your ability to really maximally get the most potent stimulus from an exercise perspective that you can get. And there's some benefit to that. Additionally, you could argue that having that strong supportive surface that you can brace against and create that increase in intra-abdominal pressure, additionally, gives your spine more support than it would otherwise have. And therefore, it actually could make heavy lifting safer as measured by the likelihood that your form could give, the likelihood that your spine position bends or flexes in some direction that could potentially increase the risk of injury. Long story short, belted lifting could potentially, in some circumstances, be safer than non-belted lifting. And that's a very real consideration when you're trying to push yourself, but also stay safe, because real talk, you're a professional person, you've got kids, you got a spouse that are counting on you, and lifting weights is a means to an end. It's not the end itself. You want to be empowered to go out and live your best life and be the strongest, most capable person you can be to live your best life. And you can't afford to get injured. You can't afford to get hurt. It is possible that with some of those heavier lifts, a belt could be somewhat of an insurance policy against certain movement flaws. It could be. You could even think of it like the belt itself might be a sort of technique cue to you, because you're receiving physical pressure from that belt. It's a tactile cue to your midline to properly embrace your core, which is so essential in all max effort lifting, having that strong braced core. So for all of these reasons, like your heavier lifting potential, increased safety, you have the physical cue of it. It increases your core stability. All these are potentially benefits to lifting with a belt. Plus, if you're trying to lift as much as possible in a competitive setting, you're most likely going to see your best performance in terms of absolute weight lifted using a belt. So there's that consideration as well. There's also cons to this. There's downsides to this. And these are things that Coach Josh Nimmo very well articulated when he posted about this. First is that it's very easy, as with any training tool, it's very easy to develop an over-reliance on that thing, where it moves from being a way of intelligently augmenting your training into a psychological or physical crutch, where if you're lifting a belt regularly all the time, you could actually lose the ability of your actual core muscles to develop that strong, stabilizing, solidifying force independent of the belt. This could actually compromise your actual abilities. Coach Josh had argued that when you're out and about doing your everyday activities of life, being a spouse, being a parent, being a working professional, being an athlete, like you're not wearing a lifting belt when you're out playing with your kids. You're not wearing a lifting belt when you're playing a sport. You're not wearing a lifting belt when you're picking up a box at work. And therefore, it is absolutely an artificial situation that potentially, again, could be creating physical or psychological dependence. And so your awareness of yourself is very important in whether or not this becomes a crutch to you. Are you able to use the belt sparingly in ways to augment your training occasionally, but you're not doing it all the time where you become dependent on it? All of these are like very important considerations in a belt versus not belt conversation. It can also, in some ways, using a belt can create a false sense of security because it does not fix poor form. It just supports proper bracing. And if your form without a belt is insufficient, a belt is not necessarily going to fix that. It can become a false sense of security, like, well, if I have the belt, I have an extra level of insurance against my own bad behavior. That is true. And that is also a thought process that can get you in trouble. So know thyself. If that is how you think of it, you could be going down a dangerous path by having a lifting belt. It's also not always appropriate. Like if you're lifting light weights, submaximal lifts, doing accessory lifts, conditioning workouts, you probably shouldn't be wearing a belt for those applications. You could also potentially argue that wearing a lifting belt is not necessarily something you do for comfort. So we do embrace discomfort, and getting comfortable being uncomfortable has real world value. Wearing a lifting belt is not necessarily something that you do because it's comfortable. And so there's maybe a consideration where like you don't want to wear it because it can feel bad sometimes. That, by the flip side, it can also feel good to wear it. So there's pros to wearing a lifting belt. There's cons to wearing a lifting belt. Sorry, I didn't switch my heading very well on here. I'll throw this out there that for me personally, I consider what I can lift without a belt and what I can lift with a belt to be two separate maxes. And I would coach everybody out there to do the same. My max deadlift with good form with a belt is one specific max, and my max deadlift without a belt is a different max. And I actually track them in my workout notes accordingly. I would strongly encourage you guys to do the same because it's good for you to know your abilities with both situations. What can I lift with a belt safely? What can I lift without a belt safely? You want to know those numbers because they can help they can inform better decisions during your training, during percentage of max lifting. All right, well, today I'm wearing a belt, so this is my training max today. I'm going to adapt to the numbers that I lift based on my lifting with a belt training max versus my lifting without a belt training max. Maybe I do that on a different training day. So something to keep in mind. Here are some general guidelines from Coach G. Take them or leave them. Some general guidelines about when you should wear a lifting belt. First, I know a lot of people that use the 80 to 85% threshold as their general guideline. When they are over 80 to 85% of their lip weight belt max, they wear a belt only then, not before it. They make their core fight its own battles up till that 80 to 85% of one rep max belted lift, and then they apply the belt at that point. So then that's one guideline that you could use. It could be, all right, in testing days, when I'm testing my max deadlift, my max squat, my max bench, my max shoulder press, I have a week where I test all my maxes with a belt, and then the next week I test all my maxes without a belt. Understand those will be different, and I will lift less without a belt. You don't need a belt during warm-ups. You don't need a lifting belt during lighter sets, and I would argue for the majority of your lifting activity, you probably shouldn't wear it so that you learn to use your core independent of support so that you have it when life depends on it outside of the gym, which is what most of us are training for. During accessory work, probably shouldn't wear your lifting belt, or maybe on exercises where you prioritize mobility and where having a lifting belt may actually impede that. You could argue like variations of cleans and snatches where the bar can actually catch on the belt as it rises. That is at least a consideration it's not a hard and fast, like I know lots of people that can lift cleans, jerks, snatches, cleans and snatches without the bar catching on the belt, but at least it should be a consideration. I know that certain kinds of lifting belts are more agreeable to cleans and snatches than others, and that could be a consideration as well. Look, if you kind of recap, we've talked about lifting belts, why you might do it, the pros of it, the cons of it, when to wear a belt. And I just want to put out there that if you use it right, it can enhance your training and allow you to do more with your training than you could otherwise do, which is great. It could even potentially make your lifting safer, but relying on it long term will actually undermine your proficiency and skill development, your development as an athlete who's got to go out and perform in everyday life outside of the gym as well. So pick, choose wisely, and decide based on your objectives, your goals, whether to use a belt or not. And I want to hear from you guys on your thoughts on this. Like, what guidelines do you use with whether to lift with a belt or without a belt? I want to hear from you guys. Let's continue the conversation in the comments section down below. For now, thank you for the gift of your time and your attention, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to my dad's podcast. For more useful tools and guidance, go to CrossFitEdwardsville.com and feel free to like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comment sections down below. See you in the next episode.